We'd like to welcome everyone to our April 28th Wildlife Board meeting. I'd like to remind the audience that the meeting is broadcast live and that all comments, we'll have you come up and make those in the microphone. Please do that audible as it's being recorded. My name is Kevin Albrecht. I'm chairman of the Wildlife Board, and we'd like to start with introductions. Let's start with Bryce.
Bryce Thurgood, Utah.
Carl Hurst, I live in Orem, represent the Central Region.
Randy Dearth, live in Vernal, represent the Northeast region.
Wade Heaton, Southern Region.
Brett Selman, Northern Region.
Gary Nielsen, Central Region.
Thank you. I'd like to ask for approval on the agenda.
I'll make the motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
All right, approval. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Seconded by Brett. All in favor? Unanimous. All right. How about approval for the minutes?
I'll make a motion, we approve the minutes of, I think it was January 31st. Do we need to do both of them, the March one and the?
Yep.
And I'll go ahead and approve both the March 4th and the January 31st.
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion and a second. All in favor? Unanimous. All right. Randy, do we have any action log items?
We've got several items, but none that are ready at this time.
Okay. Thank you. With that, I'd like to turn time over to our director for an update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems like it's been a long time since we gave a DWR update, but it seems like we've met quite frequently. So I'm excited to do this today. Before I get started, I just want to thank Stacy Coons and Amy Canning puts my update together, and Paige Wyron really helps do all this. So although this looks really good, it's not like I sat up last night putting it all together. So we have a lot of great support there. And again, these meetings that Michael Christensen puts together all of the electronics for is amazing that we're able to do this. So before I start into my slides, I just wanted to give an update on where we've had a lot of changes in personnel and positions in the last few months, and I wanted to give an update on that. First off, we created our first DWR Chief Diversity Officer, and Robin Goodman is going to run that program for us out of our director's office. We are a big agency. We employ a lot of amazing employees, and making our workplace the place people want to work and making sure that all of the values that we have in our strategic plan are kept in our workforce is very important to us, and we're excited about that change and excited for Robin's abilities there. We have selected Justin Shannon to be one of our new deputy directors, and we're excited about that change. So that led to yesterday, we held interviews for our wildlife section chief that Justin vacated, and I'm not sure if there's been an email go out, but Covy Jones was selected to be our new wildlife section chief. And we're excited about that change. This, as you can see, this continues to create domino effects within our agency. And we've also, another change I should mention is after our first legislative session and some of the big policy issues that the agency needs to address and always be on top of, we've had a part-time legislative liaison position that's partnered with another position. And we decided as a director's office, it was time to make that position full-time and permanent, and that individual would handle all of our legislative issues, big public policy things that we are working on. And Riley Peck was selected to be that person in our director's office. So that's another change. We've also had assistant section chief in our aquatics with Sarah Siegert out of our Salt Lake office. I could go on and on with all of our regional personnel moves. And anyway, there's just going to be a lot of transition in the agency for a few months. And as the director, I'm excited to see those changes because we have the talent and the personnel to be even better than we currently are. So let's see. Let's go to the first slide. Maybe. Mike, you might have to advance these. Oh, there we go. Our administrative services section, the big game drawing results will be posted no later than May 31st. If we can post those results sooner, we will. The Antlerless application period is May 26th through June 16th. And Utah's general spring turkey hunt opens next week. And the youth hunt is tomorrow through Sunday. So make sure we're packed, we're ready to go. So we're just waiting for this board meeting to get over today. So no pressure there, but we'll be ready to load up and take off. So, and those turkey permits for the general season are available over the counter through May 31st. Our aquatic section, drought continues to be an issue. You've seen some emergency regulation changes. Some of those are drought related and rotenone treatment related. We have more than 700,000 tiger muskie fry and fingerlings this year that we'll be stocking. And despite the low water levels at Willard Bay, we still had a good walleye spawn. So that'll have a positive effect on future production. And our aquatic section has really been hit hard with different vacancies, and we're transitioning through all those and hoping to have a lot of those filled by June. Our habitat section, our crews are working on guzzler projects, pinyon juniper treatments, WMA maintenance, and much more. We've started a preliminary management plan for the new Cinnamon Creek WMA. We're committing additional Habitat Council funds and efforts this year to improve our Bicknell Bottoms WMA, which we put a committee together to help us through that habitat management plan. And we appreciate their efforts there and are excited for the changes that we will plan to implement at Bicknell Bottoms. And then last and very amazing is our conservation permit partners recently committed a record high $4.2 million to habitat restoration and other projects this year. It's just a testament to what's going on the ground and the partnerships that the agency has to do great work. Our law enforcement section, you probably saw some of the media coverage that this was getting. And we had our antler auction earlier this week, and it raised more than $300,000 for wildlife conservation projects. We typically hold those every 3 to 5 years, and it had actually been 6 years since we had held an antler auction. Anyway, it was well attended, and our enforcement section did a good job of putting that together. We're expanding our canine program, and we also will be announcing new conservation officer jobs in the next few weeks. Our conservation outreach section, we just launched a new marketing campaign. Team Wildlife is the slogan there, and conserving habitat, helping species. It focuses on how we're all working together to help Utah's wildlife and habitats. It's up and running, and you'll see some ads coming out online for that. This is just something just amazing. I think it shows the depth of what our outreach section is doing out there. But in March alone, our work with the media led to 243 DWR related stories, articles, TV segments that reached 133 million people. And if we were paying for that, somewhere around the dollar figure of $5 million worth of coverage. Anyway, it's just amazing what's coming. And anyway, it just is a testament to the employees in there and the support we have. Our wildlife section, avian influenza has been confirmed in domestic poultry in the state and is likely in wild birds as well. We're monitoring our populations of waterfowl, shorebirds, scavengers, and raptors. We've been conducting sage grouse leks, luck counts across the state, and our preliminary results show population increases in many areas. We're also doing surveys for all 3 species of prairie dogs this spring. We wanted to put an extra slide in here on the tremendous amount of work that's gone into our deer captures and survival. We captured over 1,100 big game animals, mainly since I would say November to now, including 577 mule deer. Many of you have probably been able to go on some of those captures. Anyway, we are in a very good spot. We had Kent sent me some graphs. We didn't add them in here, but anyway, our deer body fat entering winter was the highest we've seen since monitoring began in 2014, averaging 10.5%. So I would just say that just like many of us who wintered very well, so did our deer. And we're excited about what that possibly leads to in the future. High body fat and relatively mild winter have resulted in high overwinter survival for adults at 95% and fawns at 74%. That's the highest we've had survival rate in 6 years. I think it was the 2016 was the highest year we've had. So anyway, that is good news, and we're hoping for some, although drought conditions exist and continue, we're hoping for good timing of moisture this spring and should help us out. And with that, I'll be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Appreciate that. Can you hold your tie up? So I want you to get a look at, he's got an awesome turkey on his tie. And I come up last night, so I forgot my tie and I had to ask Covy. Notice I have flowers and paisley. And the director's got an awesome wildlife tie. So next time, I'm going to ask the director for a tie.
I did buy that tie specifically for this spring meeting, and if you have to borrow a tie from Covy, I would ask elsewhere. So
Thank you. Appreciate that update. Any questions for the director from the board? Awesome. All right. With that, we'll call for our first agenda item. I'd like to again point out that there's comment cards there in the back, and indicate that we have 3 minutes. We'll give 3 minutes per person. With that, let's go to agenda item number 5.
And I said that without the mic on, so, okay. Just as a heads up before we get started here, we've been running all of our recommendations through a new big game database that we built. And the database takes in the data and the management objectives that we use to manage, and then it helps biologists, it helps guide biologists through those recommendations. And I've shown it at several of the racks and shown the deer projection sheets we built into the database. And today, with whatever's going on in the internet here, I'm struggling to bring it up. So the good thing with technology is it's awesome and you can use it from anywhere. And the bad thing is sometimes it doesn't work. So there's actually a team of programmers working on it right now, trying to get it going. And if they get it going and we have questions, then I can bring it up. If not, we'll have to talk through it.
Perfect. Do you have anything else to bring up from the Iraq tour with the presentations?
Yeah. So the Iraq tour, it went well this year. I think one of the things that definitely contributes to that is this meeting that we have before, where we talk with all the board members about just give an update on deer and what's going on and where we're at. The transparency with data and being able to pull that up from anywhere and show that and discuss that through the process has been great. But, overall, the RAC tour went well. a few changes based on different sentiments throughout the rack. And also the biologist recommendations that were made originally were highly defensible. So it feels like we're in a really good spot. When you're starting to argue about, we're not arguing about the data or right or wrong, we're arguing more about, we just want it this other way or this other way. That's a better spot to be in. Overall, with deer and elk, a few questions about some of the southern region units and the increases there. And it's more of a factor of the commitment we made to make big cuts. And previously, we were managing using just the buck-doe ratio last year trend and the 3-year average. And with the new management plan that we passed in 2019, we're also allowed to take into account survival and recruitment. And so that allows us to be more proactive. It allows us to get bigger cuts and get ahead of these big dips in buck-doe ratios that happen through harvest. But it also allows us to look at what survival is and estimate what's coming in to that population as far as yearlings go and make that increase before we wait for that to show up on the landscape. Really, it's more proactive. And the other thing it does is that it allows hunters to hunt, especially yearlings. We sat here at this meeting, we lose a lot of them, yearling bucks, we lose a lot of them. We lose a lot of them as fawns, and then we lose a lot of them from 1.5 to 2.5. And so if they're coming into the system and we can offer that opportunity on general season units, as an agency, we want to stick with those commitments and do that. So I think really in a nutshell, some of those increases were probably the biggest controversy this round. And I think controversy is pretty liberal there. There wasn't a lot of controversy, but those were the biggest topics of discussion.
One of the things that I noticed going to the rack tour was how many comments I received from people that watched that working meeting. And I think that really helped. That it's not just for the board and the rack chairs, but how many of our public are able to get that data. And so huge thanks to all those that put that together, especially our researchers. It really goes a long ways. So.
If I could add just one point. For a couple of years now, Covy's been telling us you're going to see under our new model and the way we're collecting this information, you're going to see big ups and big downs. You're going to see those swings. And we really hadn't seen it until this year when we've seen some big ups and big downs. And I remember being told, okay, you're going to have to be brave because this isn't, it's easy to cut, but it's hard to put a big up on the tags. And so we're finally seeing that this year, and I watched some of the regional meetings, and I agree with Covy. It was pretty easy to defend when the stuff was thrown in there, and so I mean we heard that. We've heard that for 3 years. We're seeing it this year with the big ups and big downs.
Thank you. I'll open it up to questions from the board.
And I think too, I just want to mention, if it's okay, Mr. Chair, flower tie. I do want to mention that I saw several board members at the RAC meetings, and I know that if they weren't there, they also watched them because I had phone calls saying that, hey, I saw this, what does this mean? So I know that there's a lot of interest in these, and the board members watch and pay attention to the RAC meetings as well.
Thank you, Director. If you would have had your interview with Covy before I got the flower tie, I would have appreciated a reference call. So. Any other questions?
Covy, talk about Fillmore for just a second. I guess the calculation shows, even though that we have about a 17 buck to doe ratio there in Fillmore, a little bit under the 18 to 20. We're still, as far as the body fat, the survival rate, all that, it shows that we're on the uphill side there. So I know SFW and others kind of voted, some of the RACs voted to lower that. Defend that for me.
Yeah, so I think what we really need to look at, and this is one of the, when you look at what the real cut was on the Fillmore, we cut from 2,500 permits down to 1,200 permits. So you've got to go back a few more years. And when you do that, and if it's okay, I'll just join the meeting and share some graphs that Mike made. Does that work?
Absolutely.
Okay. I probably should make sure that my sound's off, so. Technology is great. Should be joining right now. Okay. Okay. On the Fillmore specifically, we're speaking on the Bavant, not the limited entry Fillmore Oak Creek. But so if we look at what's happened there, we had a really high buck-doe ratio. As we started to see that fall off, made an extreme cut, 2,500 down to 1,200 permits. So cut just over half of the permits on the unit. That's the bottom graph. So the bottom graph is permits, and we see what happened there. And then if we look at the top graph, that was the proactive cut before it got too low. And we see that response. And with that cut, under the previous plan, we would have cut incrementally and seen it inch up, right? Seen it go from 14 to 15 to maybe 16. Under this plan, we made an aggressive cut. We jumped right back to 19. And we're within the management objective. Now, what Randy's saying is that the 3-year average, just below, but the last 2 years classification data were right in the middle. And we have a little bit of opportunity to offer there, taking into account survival and reproduction. And so that's the rationale behind the recommendation. A slight increase, we can't go back to the 2,500, but we can go back up 200 permits to 1,400 and should come in within the range.
Thank you. Thanks for showing that.
Are you close that you could show Beaver? Do you have that same?
Yeah, I do.
Sorry, I
No, you're good.
should have said something before you signed out.
No, that's fine. I'm still in. I just stopped sharing, so I'll just share again. I want to know, this is our biologists that when you talked about the recommendations, they put a ton of thought and effort into this. This is the work that Mike did, just looking at his units to see where he was. I wish the graphs were closer on the Beaver to show both at the same time. We'll do it this way. So on the Beaver, let's look at permits first. We were at 3,350, right? So a lot of permits. We've had poor survival, poor body condition, poor recruitment, which leads to less bucks in the landscape, fewer permits, still managed to the objective of the unit. Super aggressive cuts all the way down to 1,200. So we're making this cut to get back to or recommending this cut to get back to the management objective more quickly. We're close. If you look at the same trend, only now permits instead of buck-doe ratio, with the previous cut to 1,400, we hit an inflection point in the graph and are trending back up. So we're almost at 15 right now. This cut will just increase that and should get us there this year instead of waiting several years. So that's why the cut was 200 permits. It's what we need to get back to the management objective.
Mr. Chairman, could I have Covy hit on another one? Covy, I know we talked a lot about this in the RAC meetings, but the most dramatic change is on that Pine Valley unit. For members of the public that didn't hear in the RAC meeting, could you just articulate that briefly as to why we're recommending that?
Yeah. I'm just collecting my thoughts because there are really several things going on in the Pine Valley. But when you boil it all down,
Do you have it on the slide too?
I don't have Pine Valley on the slide, not,
Okay.
not here. I wish I could bring it up on the recommendations website. I may be able to bring it up here. Oh, geez. Can you join the meeting and share that?
It didn't, I
Or
just,
we can just talk through it too. So really over time, the Pine Valley, especially this last year, had really poor adult survival, 77%, I believe, really poor fawn survival. And it already came in with very low fawn-doe ratios. Back when the Pine Valley was really producing deer, we were coming in somewhere in the mid 50s to low 60 bucks or fawns per 100 does in the fall. And that's a great number, especially on a desert unit, right? We're coming in there. And then in addition to that, we had great survival. So you're pumping out fawns, you're pumping out animals constantly. Through the drought and possibly the impact of carrying a lot of bucks, it's fallen off quite a ways, right? And I guess the impact of carrying more bucks just make it fall off more quickly because you can't rebound as fast, you don't have as many does. So it caused this last year to really fall off. It showed up in the harvest data, it showed up in everything else. And when we take all those data, look at the number of animals on the landscape, look at what's coming into that population, we had to make a significant cut to get that back within the management objective. So it fell to 16 this last year. A proactive recommendation to get it back is about 1,700 permits. And that should come back up to that 18. Now it's a sting though, it's rough. And it's also really, I think on a lot of these, we try to find blame, it's somebody's fault. It's really nobody's fault. It's just that deer are struggling in the area. Now, we can keep affecting the things that we're impacting. We can keep, when deer fall off like this, things we have control over are predator management, which we can be more aggressive there still. I guess when I say we, I mean we as sportsmen. There are permits left to fill in those areas. We can do predator management, harvest coyotes, harvest cats, and help those deer have every chance they can so that when conditions line up, they can rebound. And that's what we're hoping for. That's the rationale behind the cut. It's poor recruitment, poor survival. Put us in a spot where if we're going to manage the plan, we got to cut, which is what we committed to do.
okay, with that, we'll ask the RAC chairs. Do we have any questions from the RAC chairs?
When does the Deer Committee meet again? I should probably look it up, but when do they begin?
It'd be 2023, I believe. We did 2019 and 2024.
2024.
Sorry, yeah, 2024. 19 plus 5. Numbers are hard.
In the Northern RAC meeting, I had asked a question about, first we're noticing that, as far as we're trying to supply and demand for permits and trying to give opportunity, and I had brought up and asked a question about the extended archery permits in Utah. And I was surprised. I think you mentioned there are about over 7,000 of them that were.
That was the number that came up. Let's check that number. How many extended archery deer hunters do we have across the state? And we'll check that number. But there are a lot, regardless of the exact number. There are a lot of hunters that hunt that extended unit. And I believe, Justin, the question you were asking is, have we ever thought about making that its own hunt to be able to still provide unit opportunity and then that opportunity as well? And the answer is yes. The only reason we probably haven't made that recommendation or change yet is because we've made a lot of change over the last several years in how we manage. And sometimes it felt like we were changing faster than the public was ready for. So we backed off that one. And that's one that will be coming forward in future years. When you offer opportunities that overlap like that are awesome, as long as you have the supply to meet the demand. And when you don't, you've got to either increase supply, which is what we're always working on, or you've got to make opportunities unique opportunities so that there's an opportunity for that and there's an opportunity for general season deer. And working through that is something we're definitely interested in.
Thank you. Oh, seeing no other questions from the RAC chairs, we'll turn the time over to the director to summarize comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also printed off what this is for every member of the board, so you can have these comments. This is my summary of those comments. For agenda number 5 on buck deer permit recommendations, we had 24 comments submitted, 15 comments strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's proposal, 3 comments strongly or somewhat disagreed, and 6 were neutral. I listed a lot of the ideas that were suggested through these public comments here, and I'll quickly go down through those. We should implement a 3-point or better system for buck harvest, decrease more tags to boost deer populations. 2 comments were made on mandatory harvest reporting, the need to prioritize resident permits over non-residents if we're going to keep cutting. Permit increases on some units seem to be a knee-jerk reaction to better overwinter survival the last couple of years. Non-resident and private tags should be canceled for 5 years and public permits reduced by 15%. Fawn survival is the biggest issue with our deer herds. Cutting tags isn't going to be the answer to, or cutting tags isn't the answer to growing populations. Incentivize hunters that don't harvest every year. Increase your odds if you don't harvest the previous season. Create a depredation pool for disabled individuals and youth for those hunts. Permits for 70-plus-year-olds should be unlimited. Guiding industry is having a huge impact on our wildlife. Increase premium tags on the Henrys and Paunsaugunt, where we are well above the plan metrics for those units, and no additional cuts for what the division recommended. All recommendations are within the plan and should be approved. That is my summary.
I just want to comment on that, Director, that I really appreciate that you've not only summarized those, but you looked at the individual comments. Before the meeting, I was talking to one of our RAC chairs, and the comment was, do we do a good job of the board and the RAC of hearing the public? And for the director to read some of those comments that come, individual ideas, tells me I think we've come a long ways. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but to have you see those comments and bring those to us, I think now it's the board's job to hear those and make sure the public knows that they do have an ear. But I really appreciate that you'd read those and bring those up. So with that, we'll ask our RAC chairs to report on motions. Start with Braden.
So we had 3 motions on this item. The first one, and I appreciate the discussion. We've had some good discussion primarily pertaining to the southern region, which is the region I represent. So the first motion was to move that there are no permit increases on the Fillmore Plateau Boulder unit and reduce permit increases from 500 to 250 on the Panguitch Lake unit. And just a quick comment on that. I think the objective of the RAC there was to really listen to the public sentiment. That's where this came from. We appreciate the work the RAC did. I think the numbers were very defensible, but this was the public sentiment, and we tried to represent that. That passed 7-2. The 2 people that abstained felt like we should go with the board's recommendations based on the data. So The next motion was to ask the Division and Wildlife Resource Board to evaluate the fairness of how lifetime license permits are allocated and survey lifetime license permit holders to understand what their expectations are. That passed unanimously. And then finally, to accept the remainder as presented, and that passed unanimously.
In the southeast rack, we had two motions on deer permits. The first was a motion to accept the division's proposals, and that passed unanimously after discussion. And it was also, like the southern rack, we had a motion to have the division and the board look at the way lifetime licenses are allocated. There was question about the fairness of that, and lifetime permit holders eating up a lot of permits on units with not very many permits available to the public.
Brett?
Hello, on the Northeast region, in general, the RAC strongly supported the division's recommendations. Ultimately, the motion that came out was to accept the recommendations as presented with the exception of Beaver, Fillmore, and Penguich to mirror the recommendations of Sportsman Fishing for Fish and Wildlife. And that passed 4-3.
Thanks, Brett. Brock?
Yeah, the central region had a motion to accept the DW recommendations as presented, with the exception of only decreasing the Pine Valley from 4,100 to 2,000 rather than 4,100 to 1,700. And that passed unanimously. The discussion around that was two of our RAC members asked Covy to share the model that came up with that recommendation. The model made sense, but the model was based on moderate harvest and much lower fauna and adult survival than we're currently having this winter. And so they thought it would be better to not go so drastic based on the current data.
Thanks, Brock. Justin?
Yeah, in the northern RAC meeting, there was a motion to accept the deer permit recommendation as presented, and it passed unanimously. There was a little conversation about and discussion about all of them, but we felt that with the workshop meeting that happened prior and the data showed that we were happy that everything was within the plan and thought the division did a good job.
Thanks, Justin. So far we have 2 comments from the audience. If you haven't filled a comment card out and you'd like to comment, please fill one out. We'll start with Kevin Norman, and he'll be followed by Ben Louder.
Kevin Norman representing SFW. Will you stop making fun of flowers, please, Covy? As you know, SFW, our fulfillment committee consists of our chapter chairs from around the state that form our official position. And here's our position. On the Fillmore General Season Buck Deer Unit, the division recommend increasing permits by 200 to 1,400 total permits. We recommend cutting the permits by 200 for a total of 1,000 permits. The reason was the 3-year average buck to doe is still 17 and the unit objective is 18 to 20. The Beaver unit, the division recommend a cut from 14 to 1,200. SFW recommends an additional cut of 1,400 tags to 800. Obviously, this has been discussed. The Penguich General unit, the division recommend an increase of 500. SFW recommends an increase of only 250. And then SFW is on the Fillmore Oak Creek unit, a no tag increase. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Kevin. Ben?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ben Lauder, representing Utah Archery Association. We support the recommendations as presented. Super excited about the way that we're recommending in this year and in very recent past with the bigger, not necessarily excited about the bigger swings, but the data that we have and the ability to manage on a proactive basis. And I think it's important that we recognize that in both the swings up and down that are being recommended this year. So, thank you.
Thank you. With that, that's all the comment cards I have. Do we have any clarification, Covy?
We've talked about the other units. Could you talk about Penguich Lake on
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
The other units that were brought up in the racks, we've talked about.
So Penguich Lake, again, this is a factor of really aggressive cuts. Buck Dorish responded well. This last year, we came in on the Penguich Lake. I have these data right here in front of me. So these last year, we came in at 20 bucks per 100 does. So the good news is the cut worked. We're at the top of the management objective. And that increase will keep us within the management objective. It's actually a pretty conservative increase when you look at all the data for that unit. It could have been more. So when we project it, we do 3 projections. We do a scenario based on average harvest over the last 5 years, a scenario based on the highest harvest over the last 5 years, and a scenario based on the lowest harvest over the last 5 years. And if you look at Penguich Lake, I believe it comes in under all 3 scenarios. So there's really a chance of getting above the management objective. And I just said that then puts us in a really weird spot because then we're bringing bigger increases for the following year. So again, when we wrote this plan, if we're going to be allowed to manage to it, it puts us in an awkward position and even more erratic permit recommendations when we get way above the objective and have to make bigger recommendations for increases.
All right, with that, I will go ahead and summarize the rack chair motions, and then we'll open it up to comment from the board. Again, like our rack chairs read in the central region, that there was an exception to increase the Pine Valley buck deer permits from 1,700 to 2,000. In the southern region, there was a motion to reduce the permit increase from 500 to 250 on the Penguich Lake unit. And also out of the southern region, they asked the Wildlife Board to evaluate the fairness of how the lifetime license permits are allocated and survey lifetime license holders to understand what their expectations are. And I think during our discussion, I did ask Lindy if she would look into some of that information, and is she here? Oh, okay, perfect. And so with that, she'd be available to present some of that. And also the motion out of the Northeast region to go along with the SFW, the exception of the Beaver, Fillmore, and Penguich Lake would be reduced. So,
Mr. Chair, are you okay if I just present, the website's working now, are you okay if I present the Penguich Lake just to show the models we ran there?
please.
So on the Penguich Lake, these are the 3 scenarios. So on the Penguich Lake, these are the 3 scenarios under that recommended increase. Come down here to the bottom. We look at what actual success was, what hunters actually harvested on that unit for the last 5 years, and use our best data on survival and recruitment to say, under these conditions, with high success, you're going to come in at 18.5. With average success, you're still going to be above and at 20.4. And with low success, you could be outside of the range at 21. So really, it feels like a big jump, pretty conservative increase, and we've had a lot of cuts on this unit as well, significant cuts. If we look back to 2017, we were at 3,200 permits. So, hope that helps.
Thanks, Covy. I'd ask the board, would it help to have Lindy present that on the lifetime now? Why don't we do that, and then we'll go into board discussion?
While Lindy's coming up, maybe I could ask Braden and Kent, why, out of your racks, there was some concern of the lifetime tags. Now, those are, help me understand the concern. I know those are, they're public, they're part of the public, but because there's so many of them jumping in one area or another, is that the concern?
Yeah, so the basic concern there, Randy, is the idea with these huge tag cuts. So specifically, let's talk to Pine Valley. There's potential that if the historic number of lifetime license holders put onto the Pine Valley this year with the tag cuts we have, that there may be less than 700 to 800 tags available for the public. Just a comment here, I don't know if this would be appropriate or not, Randy, but Austin Atkins is here. He had some good data on that, and he's the one that kind of presented that in our rack. If you had questions specific to that, he may have some better data than I have. But that was a big discussion is on the Pine Valley with those huge cuts. We're seeing similar cuts on the B-Bird. It's a 65% reduction over the last 3 years. And we saw this on Thousand Lakes. When Thousand Lakes first opened as a general unit, there were no public tags available due to the lifetime license holders. So that's where the concern comes from. That's not to say we shouldn't continue to award those tags. That's not to say we're giving direction on what we want done with those. It's just a concern that we'd like to look into.
Okay, so Kevin asked me to kind of give you guys just a high overview of the lifetime program. So that's kind of what it is. So it's a little bit of history. This is my old one. Oh, well, it's pretty much, hold on one second. Shoot. So this lifetime license program is regulated by Utah Code and by Wildlife Rule. I've listed the two codes there. This program started in 1984, and we stopped issuing permits in February of 1994. So 10 years this program went on. We only issued 4,605 total lifetime license permits, and currently there's still 4,196 remaining. So with the lifetime license program, a permanent lifetime license card is issued to these lifetime holders in lieu of an annual hunting and fishing license. So they receive an annual combination license for their life. And in addition, those that are eligible are entitled to receive without charge a general season buck deer permit for the weapon and unit of their choice. So out of there's actually 4,193. Like I said, this is my old one. I'm not quite sure why it didn't replace it when I saved it last night. But the 392 is accurate that will receive a general season buck deer permit for this current year. So not every one of them takes up this opportunity. And I've looked over the last 5 years, and it's pretty steady that 3,900. It goes up maybe like 50 or down 100. But it's pretty average of that 3,900 number. And in total, they take up about 5% of the overall number of general season deer tags. And then I threw this out, yeah.
A question while you're there. The difference between the 3,992 and the 4,196, why are those not asking for it, or what do you think's going on?
There's a couple different things. Some actually aren't hunters anymore. They don't utilize it. When this program started, they could purchase this permit when they were babies. Not this permit, this opportunity. And they never grew up as a hunter. Like they just never, so they've never got a deer permit. Some of them opt for different opportunities to hunt deer. So a CWMU or a conservation permit. So they go different avenues, or they just don't hunt general season deer anymore.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So then what I did out of those 41, almost 4,200 lifetime guys, I took the ages to figure out where these guys were. And the average age is 59 of our lifetime license holders. The youngest is 28. So this individual, I don't know if it was he or she, bought it when they were a couple months old. And then the oldest, yes, yeah, exactly. And then the oldest is 95. I had an awesome graph, and I'm kind of bugged, but let me see if I can find it real quick, and then I can just kind of give you so what I did is I broke it out by ages. Okay, so above 83 years old, there's like 125 of these gentlemen, of these hunters.
So it's not sharing, is it?
No.
Oh, okay. That's okay.
I can see if I can find it. Like I said, I don't know why this didn't save last night. I was working on it at the elk committee, so. But the bulk of our lifetime license holders are between the ages of 40 and 60. That's the biggest percentage. And then from there, it's from.
Do you know how many approximately in that percentage, 40 to 60, like 2,000 or?
Yeah, it's about 1,900.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So the bulk of them are in that age percentage. And then there's like 160 that are the age from 28 to 38.
Okay.
And then about 1,200 in the 30 to the 40. So.
Thank you. I think really appreciate you putting that together. I think that really helps not only us. I wonder if we couldn't take that information and have that go through a rack tour. I think it would be very beneficial. So.
Yeah, no, and I will get my other one that has a little bit, the pie chart of the age groups. But if you have questions about individual units, kind of what you were talking about with Austin, him and I worked on that together. So I know what it is. So if you have questions about units and lifetime.
Can you give the top three, where the numbers and what those top three units are?
So you got your Pine Valley, and they take up 27% of the quota. This is for actually this year. This will reflect it.
Because of if we vote off of the number that's recommended by the
yes.
division.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I put together if it was approved as is, what we presented as the division, lifetime license holders would take up 20% of the quota on Pine Valley. The next one would be your Thousand Lakes, and they're again at 27%. And then the next one is the Fish Lake at 20%. And then the rest of them are pretty much like 10% or below. Most of them are in the 2 to 3 to 4% of the quota.
And-
They disperse themselves really well across the state.
And can you speak to the weapon type that they usually choose?
In particular to Pine Valley? Or
Yeah,
those
maybe
three?
to those three.
Yeah, so on Pine Valley, 4.4% will take up archery on the Pine Valley. On the early rifle on Pine Valley, they'll take up 18%. On the regular rifle season, they'll take up 44%. And then on the muzzleloader, they'll take up 22%. And then looking at Thousand Lakes, I didn't do the percentages real quick. Making her do the math. Okay, right there. So for archery on the Thousand Lakes, they'll take up almost 9%. On the rifle season, they only have the one, it's 48%, and then muzzleloader is 16. And then on your Fish Lake, they take up 6% of the archery. The early rifle is 10%, the regular rifle is 29%, and the muzzleloader is 26%.
Thank you.
Yep.
First off, my microphone's in the back of Stacy's trunk. I'm positive if somebody go find it. She took it away from me. Is there a cap? No cap. They can pick, like all of them could pick the Pine Valley if they wanted to.
Potentially, yes, they could. There's no cap, there's no set percentage. And we monitor this every year. And, you know, there was the one time when Thousand Lakes, when we went into the 30 units, the first year is where we had the one issue. But ever since then, it's granted these units do take up a lot, almost 3, but they disperse themselves quite well across the state. You know, where they're taking up only, like on the Ochre Stansbury, they only take up 5% of the quota.
So no one's ever proposed a cap limit on, say, 10% or something?
Nope.
Is that possible?
We would have to look into the rule and statute and evaluate it and just kind of, we haven't looked that deep into it. But you definitely can make the recommendation for us to make an action log item to look into. Because like I said, it is regulated by code and by rule.
And is it, one of the issues that it's more of a concern this year is because of the 3 years of drought and our low population numbers, which is have affected the number of buck tags?
It is, yeah, especially on the Pine Valley when we dropped from 4,400 down to 1,700. You know, if I pull up 2020 percentage, like I said, I keep a very good tab on these guys just because I want to make sure this doesn't happen. Let's see here. On Pine Valley, they only, when it was, you know, 4,500 permits, they were only taking up 10% overall of the quota. But when you make these drastic cuts, you know, what I've noticed over the years is these lifetime guys really don't move. They kind of stick with their unit. You know, once in a while they'll shift, but a high percentage of them stay with the same unit they've hunted because that's their hunting grounds. And so when you do these drastic cuts, these aren't really moving. So of course they're going to take more of the quota. But 2 years ago, they're only taking 10% of Pine Valley.
So that's all we need, more deer.
Yeah, I'll say that again, like I did last time. Cody, I'll let your chief kind of grow more deer.
Yeah, sure. And I need to disclose I am one of these guys.
Yep.
On this. Now, when we went to the Thousand Lake, I mean, it jumped over, there was even a higher percent, but it took a couple of years and then it bounced back down
It did.
on that. So these units that we have, I mean, the Pine Valley is the unit that's bringing this to bear. We artificially manage that to a higher buck-to-doe ratio on that. It was advertised. If you watch this meeting, it was the place to go. And I remember talking in the Mulder committee about if we keep managing this high, these lifetime license holders are going to migrate there, and that's what happened. And then as soon as we cut, we're going to have this discussion. So this isn't any new topic of this. It's come to light, but we've discussed this for about 5 years, that if we stay in the plan and all of the units are even, and most of these guys stay at their home unit. When they get a good unit or an opportunity like a limited entry that's going general, or a unit that we've artificially kept the buck-to-doe ratio on, these guys move. And I'm one of those ones that bought them for my 2 sons, and so they're those younger ones. But this isn't anything new. It's been talked about for 5 years. Like a couple of years for it to even out.
It did.
And Pine Valley, to be honest with you, if we were under the permit system that will be under next year, where they would have seen these tags, you wouldn't have had these guys put in for it. They would have spread out. So.
Could we jump in? I appreciate the RAC bringing this up. I appreciate this discussion. However, I would feel a little uneasy if we try to make some changes in discussion, decisions today. I feel like this needs to go back through the public process again. All the RACs need to weigh in, perhaps a proposal from the division that people could hear and get more information. There will be 1,400 people that squeal about this. They need to be heard. And so, yes, I'm grateful for this discussion. I'd be a little uneasy about making a decision today.
Chair, can I make a comment?
Sure.
One thing that I thought about with this, and I had the discussion with a couple of other people, is the fact that this is codified. It's not just a big game rule. This is state law, that people get the permit of their choice. And that's what's written in the statute and state code. So any movement in this direction needs to take that into account and be very careful about it, that we don't get crossways of state law. And this change may have to be done legislatively.
Yeah. I did learn that very quickly the day after the motion was made, and I spoke with the legislators to let me know that it was state law. I would just add to Wade, if we did make a movement, that it go through the RAC process. But I try to spend a lot of time on the phone. I spend a lot of time with Lindy. I did talk to many legislators. And what I would say is we could direct the division to look at this and ask them. But learning more myself, I actually think that it's going to come to what Kent just stated, that it is state law. And we could ask the division to go this, and I'm 100% confident we would be in class action lawsuits where there was individual contracts signed by every one of these. I think it opens up a whole new dynamic. So my thought would be, I would tell the board that we watch this closely, but I would actually ask that we don't ask the division to spend a lot of time and go through the RAC process, because ultimately I think we could ask them to spend that time, but I'd rather they spend their time on working on growing deer, because ultimately I don't think that we can change that state code. Just my thoughts, but I'd open it up for the board to discuss that. With that, I'd open it up for all board discussion, not just lifetime permits. So thanks, Lindy. Who took Bryce's microphone?
Well, I'll start. I really like the plan that we're managing under, and I really like the new elements that we're adding into that, and the high and the low and the average harvest. I think by messing with that system and artificially adjusted, we've created our own lifetime problem, license hold problem with that. And so where I'm sitting on these is the DWR recommendation. I mean, I know there's some adjustments and some feelings there, but I really like the new system that we're using.
Thank you.
I'll just take a minute. I do support that also. I know that we would prefer, I think, or to go right with the 3-year average on our deer. But when we do have some swings like we're seeing, I think we need to allow some flexibility there. So I'm comfortable with the division's recommendations across the board on this also.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's just a wonderful step forward that we added recruitment and that survival component to our models. I think that was long overdue, and I really appreciate all the effort that's gone into doing it, because I think it gives us so much better information that we can make these decisions on. And so I appreciate the division working those elements in, and I also appreciate all the great work our local biologists are doing, because they're the ones really coming up with these recommendations. And so I think the division has done a wonderful job. I appreciate Covy's comment last month that, and I'll hold him to that commitment, that the division isn't going to play games anymore. They're not going to pad their numbers because they know the board is going to tweak with them and add an extra 400 on because they know the board's likely going to shrink it by 400 and they land where they want to be. And I appreciate that approach, because I think it's going to get us in a better place. I think the board can have more confidence in the recommendations, and we won't be as apt to mess with them as we often do. And I have a lot of confidence, probably more confidence in these recommendations than I've had ever. And I just appreciate the division. I think the division got it right on this one.
When I was sitting in the central rack and we were talking about the 60% cut on the Pine Valley of tags, and I know they proposed that just even it off at 2,000 instead of taking in add a 200 to it. And Covy said he wouldn't have any heartburn about that. But as I've looked at the data and I've looked at the things we now use to determine this stuff, I'm supporting the division's proposal.
If we vote unanimous on this, I think it'll be the first time I've ever seen the Wildlife Board on this meeting do that. So.
Well, I'll throw something in there to make it so it's not unanimous. I think the board should be offered lifetime licenses. And Carl won't agree with it, so it won't be unanimous. No, I really appreciated our training or our information that we received last month. And then all of this, I agree with everyone else. It's really cool to see that where we're working to and how we're getting there.
Can I make a motion?
Please do.
I make a motion, we adopt the presentation as presented from the division. I appreciate their work on it too.
A second? Seconded by Gary. I think on this one, I can just ask all in favor. Wow. Incredible. I think it speaks to all of the efforts that have gone. And I think it's a lot more than just a tremendous amount of work, but I want to speak to it now because I think that we've got some of our partners with that help by the callers that pay for flight time. And I think it's a collective group, but to get on a meeting like this where it's a unanimous vote just tells me the effort is well worth what's being put in. So thank you. All right. With that, let's go to
Would you turn on your microphone and say that louder, please?
Hey, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to publicly thank Bryce for being the new whipping boy for Stacy now, so I don't have to worry.
Covy, have you ever seen that before?
And Chairman, I would just advise people that March meeting where we do kind of a state of the mule deer is becoming a giant meeting. And so I would encourage people to participate in that, work with Covy, and now it's Covy staff. And I mean, I'm always a little nervous when we all vote the same in this, and it looks like we did it quickly, but this is a 2-month process that we've been looking at this stuff. And so I encourage people to be part of that meeting in March. And I hope, well, I guess I hope we keep holding it. It's one of the best meetings I attend all year.
In thinking that, and this is it's a commitment that I probably can't make, but I'll say it anyways. We should really, it's the interaction between the board and everybody. Now, doing it at that time of year is difficult, and we do it for the board at that time of year. And that said, we should probably work with the RACs, you know, and do the same type of interactive meeting with the RACs. Now, we can't do all those in March with the RACs, but it would be a good meeting to have more locally to allow for that type of local interaction. And thinking about that and talking about that, I think it would really help. We've got a lot of trust here and worked through a lot of these issues here, and the folks that watch it always comment on it. And it would just be awesome to extend that to the rest of the state and have those discussions.
Thank you. How would that be received from our RACs and our RAC chairs? Do you think that would be worth the time?
I think it would be worth the time, especially we've had a lot of our non-consumptive and newer RAC members, you know, spend a lot of time on, they'll call me, they'll call Ben, and I asking and trying to understand some of these things more. I think it would be a great idea.
I was going to say the same thing. I think the majority of our RACs are watching that meeting, but to be able to participate and ask their questions would just be fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, with that, we'll have Covy come up and we'll go to agenda item number 6.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a review, recommended buck and bull permits. The majority of the discussion on this through the RAC process was something that I think we'll have to really address with the elk, the statewide elk committee. It's how do we maintain population objectives through cow harvest, and cow harvest is becoming more. It's evident that it's becoming more and more important to maintain a younger age class on the landscape over time. And in doing that, maintain our population objectives that we've committed to. And then the third complicating factor is have some of these older age classes and keep our bull cow ratios in check. And it's complicated. It became very complicated on the beaver. That's probably the most discussion we had on this topic was in the southern region and about the issues going on the beaver, where we've had aggressive cow harvest. To meet our population objective, we manage at the highest age class. And now you end up in a situation where with projection factors, you're probably at 1-to-1 on your bull cow ratios. I don't know if we can solve all that here, and that's not the intent, but discussion is how do we maintain this quality over time and manage in a way that will be most beneficial. I think that was about the biggest discussion on this topic. If I missed something, I'm sure somebody else will jump in and let us know, but overall, the recommendations went smoothly.
Thank you. With that, I'll open up to the board for questions for Covy.
I have one, Mr. Chair. Covy, on the Dutton, we added quite a few permits to the bull elk. To the bull elk hunt, we added quite a few permits. But the allocation between hunts seemed very odd to me. We actually lowered the number of archery permits, raised the number of rifle tags. What was the reasoning behind that redistribution?
The primary reason was to move some of those back out of the late season rifle. And I don't want to say too much here because Kyle adjusted those splits. So I don't know I don't know why some of them pulled from the archery, but the percentage were increased and decreased in areas mostly focused around that late season. So that was a concern brought up several years ago. And that unit, we've deviated from the plan a bit for that reason. We're not completely set on that allocation. If there's some distribution concerns there, it's understandable.
Any other questions for Covy? Questions from our rack chairs? All right, we'll ask the director to summarize comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On agenda item number 6, bull elk and buck pronghorn permit recommendations, we had 18 comments, 12 comments strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's proposal, 4 comments strongly or somewhat disagreed, and 2 were neutral. Some of the major themes in those comments were keep working on public access on CWMUs, disagree with pulling limited entry elk permits from archery and muzzleloader hunts and placing them in the rifle hunt. Moving permits from lower success hunts to a higher success doesn't make a lot of sense, and this comment used the Wasatch unit as an example. Another comment, concern with the age structure of limited entry elk units. Maintaining a high age class makes managing the herds difficult. The beaver unit was used as an example. Should increase permits on these units to reduce point creep and create more opportunity. And the last theme I'll cover, prefer to see elk managed on a bull to cow ratio instead of by age class.
All right, with that, I'll ask our rack chairs to comment on the motions.
So we had 2 motions on this. The first motion was to increase the bull elk numbers on the beaver unit from 51 to 76 and distribute the additional permits proportionally with current recommendations. That passed 6 in favor and 2 opposed. And then we had a motion to accept the remainder as presented. Mr. Chair, is it all right if I speak to that recommendation on the beaver quickly? So I live in Beaver. That's my backyard. At the meeting, I pushed back on this motion a little bit. My concern primarily was that those going into this application period were going in with the expectation of a premium hunt and the expectation that the numbers would be roughly 38 like they've been in years past. So to double those permits for people that are going in 25 points, I didn't like the way that felt. However, it wasn't based on what's going on the unit. I had the opportunity to fly the unit. I saw the bull to cow ratio, and I believe the higher permits is what's actually needed there. But I propose we waited till next year when we know those numbers before the application. Having said that, over the last couple of years, I've had hundreds of phone calls and comments on what's going on the beaver unit, concerns with that elk herd. I have had 0 comments to this recommendation, which is shocking to me. I haven't had anyone contact me. I haven't had anyone express concern. And so I think that's valid to share that with the board.
Thanks, Braden.
In the Southeast region, there was just one motion that was unanimous to approve the recommendations as presented by the division.
In the Northeast region, we had a lot of discussion about the book cliffs, and the division did a good job presenting that. And there's some pretty significant cuts on the bull tags. And as usual, we discuss the spike elk hunt on the book cliffs, which we do every meeting all year, even if it's not on the agenda, and hash that back and forth. And then I initiated some discussion on the hams hunt that I wanted to just take a moment to discuss. There's motion also along this line, if that's okay, Mr. Chair. Back when we had the proposal to move anthro to general season, and in addition to West Desert, and there was a third unit, and there was a lot of differing opinion between the division and the RACs at the time. And the board come up with this idea of the hams hunt for the 3 units. And I just kind of wanted to report on that. Last year, the harvest on the hams hunt was within 1 animal of what it was at limited entry. So it was not I'd kind of envisioned we were going to take more animals and possibly transition into the general season, or at least provide more opportunity. And last year with the 40 tags on the anthro, the actual harvest was the same as it had been within 1 animal when it was a limited entry. So the division this year recommended going up to 60 from 40. And what I heard when we were back debating that issue a year ago here at the Wildlife Board is we wanted to provide an opportunity for people to use a bunch of preference points and maybe harvest more animals on that unit. And so I initiated some discussion, and the division was not in opposition of it, that maybe we ought to go more than 60. So with that, we had a motion on the table from at the RAC to increase it to 80, from 20 more than the division's recommendation on the hams hunt. That motion failed for lack of a second. And then the next motion was to approve it as presented, and that passed unanimously, 6-0. Thank you.
Thanks, Brock.
The Central Region had a motion to accept the DWR's recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Justin?
The Northern also had a recommendation to accept as the proposal as presented, and it passed unanimously. We had a little bit of discussion, but knowing that the Elk Committee is beginning to meet, we felt like we spoke with them with some of the things that we'd like to see, and again, everyone agreed with the proposal.
Thank you. With that, we will go to comments from our audience. First up is Ben Louder, and he'll be followed by Tanner Carlson. And if you haven't filled out a comment card, please do so.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ben Lauder, representing Utah Archery Association. We support the recommendations as presented. Thank you.
Tanner Carlson with SFW. We also support the division's recommendations as presented. Thank you guys for your time.
Thanks, Tanner. I don't think we need any clarification. With that, I'll summarize. Do you have any clarification?
Just one point. It was brought up in the comments. Wade asked about one specific split on the Dutton. There were other splits that were changed. And those splits were, when we did recommendations this year and wrote the new database, it calculated splits automatically. when it did that, we asked each biologist, is there a reason why those splits should differ? So we have the planned splits, and then there's an allowance to deviate from those splits under certain conditions. And the Wasatch and a few others, we had deviated in the past because of crowding. And now we have that extra mid-season hunt and some tools that we didn't have when we made that deviation. So we reevaluated a lot of those and just brought them back to the planned splits. Said if we can't justify it, we probably ought to just leave it alone. And so when you're looking at some of the other splits that changed, that's the rationale, just so you have it.
So I understand, to Wade's question, so are you recommending to stay at the split that's presented by the biologist or to go to the?
No, what I'm saying is that on the Dutton, Kyle purposely made that change and moved those around, primarily focused on the late season hunt and the addition of some permits. On the rest of these, the splits deviated. It was because they got moved back to the planned splits because we no longer had the justification we had when those were changed. So that's just a clarification.
And did that overall make it just a general statement of we went from our lower success to our higher success? Did those permits move that way?
It's possibly, if there were permits removed from archery, which is, it definitely separates itself as a lower success hunt. And we just couldn't justify it under the plan. We didn't have that rationale anymore. That was why.
Mr. Chair, could I speak to that too? And I appreciate that clarification. In some cases it did, Carl. Some cases we did move archery hunts into the rifle hunt right in the middle of the rut. But I'm also a huge local control, local wildlife biologist, probably knows best. And certainly in the case of Kyle, there's no one I trust more. So I will definitely yield to their recommendation, and I'm comfortable with that.
And just an additional question, Covy. I know the elk committee is meeting now. And one of the recommendations was to look at hunt structure.
Yes.
And see if there were ways to adjust our most successful weapons out of our most vulnerable times. Are they talking about that?
We went through all of those data last night. And this committee, it's a interesting, fun committee. I think we have some, if you don't know who represents you, find out who it is. We've got some brave members, and I can see some change on this committee. I think the challenge given by Wade of, if there's change necessary, make it. Like, let's make the change when we need to. I know I took that and I was like, kind of hit home to me of, if there's change necessary, and let's be brave. You know, Director Shirley also spoke to the group and along those same lines said, you know, let's really take a hard look at this and make sure that we're doing what's best for the resource, what's best for hunters. And if there's change that needs to be made, let's evaluate it and make those changes. So I feel like the group really has a lot of support to look at that critically and see, where do we need to go? What changes do we need to make? So yeah.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I'll summarize the motions. With the exception of the Northeast region with the failed motion, four of the regions accepted the division proposal as presented, and the southern region moved that they increase the bull elk permits on the beaver unit from 51 to 76 and distribute the additional permits proportionally with the current recommendations. So with that, I'll open it up to the board for discussion.
I'll start again. I really think we need to give the Southern Rack and this recommendation on the beaver to up those tags. I think that is we've been told that we're 1-to-1, maybe even a little higher than 1-to-1. I feel for those folks that put in for that. They may not have the experience that they thought with the lower tag numbers, but we've got to fix something, and I really don't want to wait a year on it. The rest of the recommendations I'm okay with.
Colby, can you speak to that, to the division's thought on that proposal and what that looks like?
It's pretty aggressive and it's understandable. We have similar concerns. And there's also the concern that was brought up by Braden. So if you look at it, I don't know that we have a particular stance on this one. If you're looking for direction, I don't know that there's a wrong or a right answer here. I think we've fleshed out a lot of what the concerns may be, and also that when you manage a population, it was Justin, where's he at? Right there. I asked the question when we were presenting these recommendations to one of the conservation groups, would anybody manage their cattle herd at 1-to-1? And Justin raised his hand. He said, well, it depends. I said, depends on what, Justin? He says, well, if I only had one cow, I would have one bull. And so, yeah, we're concerned about this too. It's, as I mentioned at the first of this portion of the meeting, it's a tough thing to do to manage for high age class, manage your population, and have good bull-cow ratios. And I do want to say, because there was a comment, managing on bull-cow ratios alone, age objective really is great. Bull-cow ratios are terrible. When you talk to our partners across the West that try to use bull-cow ratios as a source of data, it is because elk have different life strategies than deer, and the elk rut is in September, deer in November. Deer come off onto areas where you can see the bucks and see the does and get good data. In September, you can't get those good data. And in the winter, when you fly them, bulls are in different places than cows. So bull-cow ratios, although it can be a useful tool, it's hard to get good bull-cow ratios. That's why we said when we picked up that many bulls per 100 cows, it's probably at or higher than 1-to-1 because you don't see as many of them on the landscape. Some concern. I don't have all the answers, I guess.
Thank you.
What I meant by brave, Covey, was let's have a serious discussion about that rifle hunt. I didn't want to say it, but that's what I was alluding to. But can I make a comment, Mr. Chair? Two comments. Covey, to your comment during the RAC meeting, I'm going to ruin your analogy forever, which I don't intend to, because I believe what you're saying is true from a biological standpoint as it applies to this issue. But would a rancher ever run their cattle operation at a 1-to-1 ratio? And the answer is maybe. If he's raising bulls, if he's trying to sell 3- and 4-year-old bulls, then there's a very good chance maybe he does. And the argument could be made that that's what we're trying to do on some of these units. So for what that's worth, but two questions, Carl. The beaver, you mentioned you could support an even greater increase on bull tags. The division's recommending 51. Question to Braden, what was the Southern's recommendation? And Carl, to you, what would you be comfortable with?
I believe Southern was 76.
So the division's recommendation was 51.
Right.
Our recommendation is 76. The division's recommendation, just to be clear, is a 50% increase from the year before. So that would put it at 38.
38 to 54.
50 to 76 is what we're
76.
recommending.
Sure.
Separate this out into a couple. I'll make the motion that we increase the beaver bull tags to 76 and allocate them according to the breakout. And that'll be just to be a one specific unit on that.
Okay, so we have a motion by Carl, seconded by Bryce. Any questions on the motion? All right, we'll do this individually. Let's call for a vote. Let's start with Bryce.
Yes.
No, and and I'm saying that it might be the right thing to do. in this case, but we do expect the division to administer to the plan, and that's why I'm voting no.
I'm a no as well.
Yes. How's that, Gary?
You know what the easy thing is? You put it back on him.
I'm actually the board member that's on the elk plan committee, and we looked at a lot of data last night, like 4 hours worth. Went through it carefully, and I watched how the division made their recommendations and the thing they proposed, and I'm going to stick with division. I'll say no.
It's 3-3.
Our board is getting really good at this. Covy, come up. I want to make sure I understand this. One of the biggest reasons on this unit is because we've harvested antlerless elk to get them within the plan, and so it's brought our bull to cow ratio at this.
Yeah, yes, and I should note, just providing all the information, all the data, that a lot of the bulls, when we flew this, were mature, what we would consider mature bulls. Mike, Tracy, do you remember how many, or just percentage-wise? About 2/3. Braden was on the flight. 2/3 of the bulls counted were mature bulls. That's just providing all the data.
You know, on this one, normally I feel like I'd have a stronger opinion, but I feel that our data is good from the division, and with 51, but I also feel strongly to hear our racks, and this one is odd that our rack is proposing this, and I don't want them to feel like we don't hear them. But I'd like to ask I know Covy's answer, but I'd like to ask the director if you have any thoughts and direction on this.
My initial thoughts on this are obviously based on where our biologists come in on these recommendations. I think that the increase was needed. I also attended the Southern Region RAC, and we recognize the issue and the problem there. So whether whether that changes in a year with the new elk management plan, or we start down that road right now, I think that's the direction it looks like we're going on some of these units. That's the biggest thing I think you're weighing, is we may be going down this in a year anyway. And so weighing out whether the timing is now or later, I think that's what the board needs to decide.
Thank you. And that helps me, because I want the Southern RAC to know that we do hear them. I think that in that elk committee, we absolutely had the opportunity to go to that last night and to be able to hear the data presented. And this unit was discussed a lot with a lot of the data. I would, with my vote, I will go in line with the division's proposal. And I think that in a year, the elk committee will take a hard look at this. Good.
Mr. Chair, you ready for another motion? So that motion failed. I'd like to address the beaver as well, and just stay with that to keep it simple. And my only reason for voting no is it was just a bit much for me. I'd like to soften it and recommend 65 bull tags for this year.
Okay, we got a motion on the table. We have 65 bull tags on the unit.
I'll second that.
Okay. Seconded by Carl. Any discussion on the motion?
Feels like we're both so.
All right, I'll call for a vote. We'll start with Bryce.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 Motion passes.
Make the motion that we approve the rest of the elk recommendations as presented by the DWR.
I'll second that.
Okay.
And pronghorn, correct? Are we separating those out?
I'm okay with both.
Yep.
Pronghorn and elk.
Yep. Okay, motion for both pronghorn on elk. Got a motion and a second? Okay. All right, all in favor, Bryce?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Unanimous. All right, with that, Riley, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're all right, there's one item I'd like to address from the beginning. Traditionally, the division has come to the Wildlife Board every 5 years to discuss bison on Antelope Island, specifically allowing Antelope Island to manage the herd the way that they do and offer additional bull tags when necessary. These are typically bull bison that are upward in age. They are maybe not as pretty to look at as some of the bison that are being harvested by the hunters. And so they become difficult for the island to manage. That population becomes difficult. And so we don't know how many they will be on a year-to-year basis. That's why we typically bring it to the board and request permission. It is used, or all of the hunters are generated off of the alternate draw list. So they are applicants that have put in to hunt Antelope Island to begin with. If they are selected, it typically means that the island will call the hunter and say, you know, you have been selected to hunt this, but we need you to take specific animals. They don't come onto the island and hunt and have your typical hunt where you go and pick which animal to harvest. We are specifically targeting the older age class animals. And so with that, that is one thing that we needed to bring to your attention to begin with, that perhaps we would like to bring that recommendation to you and get another 5-year approval to use that. Over the last few years, that has taken place every year. It has been, to my understanding and quick notes, generated from a few tags up to 5. And I think we have Jim Christensen here that can respond a little bit better to the amounts, but they're typically not large numbers and are less than 5 most every single year. Do you have any questions on that? Because they're not specific numbers and because we're not making a recommendation, we don't know if this will even be put into effect year to year. It doesn't go through all of the regions and is only brought to the board. But if you have any questions or clarification, I'd be happy to answer those.
Do our rack chairs have any questions on that?
Basically what you're saying is what we've been doing is working.
We believe that it is, yeah. We feel like it's a good process and it gives the tags always get filled. There's always a hunter that's excited to take a really old age bull bison off the island. So we believe that it's working and we'd like to continue.
And our partners out there, the parks guys, are okay with?
They are, yeah. They appreciate how it is going as well.
Just a quick comment. I think it's a wonderful tool and I appreciate the flexibility of it. If it's obviously working, it's a needed service. So I think it's wonderful.
With that, that is it. We have the once in a lifetime recommendations that were put forward. And I think that, we bring this up to the RAC, and in many situations, our once in a lifetime populations are a little tinier. They're smaller, more sporadic across the state. We see recommendations that change in single digits to half a dozen sometimes on the top end. And so our recommendations fall within that. And one that you will notice that is maybe a little off from in recent years are some of our northern area goat populations seem to be struggling a little bit more. As best that we can come up with, and what we are finding from caller information, is that our goat populations seem to be affected by the drought at higher elevation than they have in previous years. And so if you'll notice on some of the recommendations, we've made those accordingly. They fit within the plan and with our most recent surveys, but we are trying to get better information on that. But we do believe that that is a cause maybe for decreasing population sizes. I know that the managers and biologists are here on many regards, so on many of the units. So if you have specific questions, we'll do the best that we can to address those. But I wanted to bring that up to begin with. I think our goat populations are one that we are seeing even a higher decrease than is normal for once in a lifetime populations. I think as you get used to seeing them, we fluctuate in permit recommendations so much smaller than we do with elk, deer, or pronghorn that I wanted to maybe highlight that a little, and would be happy to answer any questions, if any, or maybe even ask the managers or biologists to help. But
Can you speak to maybe how many years you've seen less recruitment in those areas, and what are the areas of mostly of concern, or is that across the board on all of those?
no, so it is mostly in the northern portion of the state. We don't fly our goats every single year. We're on a rotation. And so this last flight was the first time we're really seeing some drastic decreases. If you remember, when we made the hunt recommendations in the fall, we came back and asked on some of them that we even remove a non-resident permit because we were concerned with population numbers after that flight. So we made that change even after the initial recommendation came out. So it has been as recent as our most recent flight. Our success rate for the hunters has not fluctuated like you would expect on a once in a lifetime. There are still plenty of animals that have been harvested at the high success rate that we manage for. So it has been a recent finding, and we're working on collaring and working through the constraints of the populations to try and better answer those questions moving forward as well.
Thank you. All right, appreciate it. Any questions from the RAC chairs? All right, we'll have our director summarize our comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On agenda item number 7, once in a lifetime permit recommendations, we only received 11 comments on this item. 9 of those comments strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's proposal. There was 1 comment strongly disagreed and 1 that was neutral. Some of the themes from those comments are what Riley was just talking about, ways that the division can increase mountain goat hunting opportunity. Somebody specifically asked Riley to explain drought at higher elevations. A comment on once in a lifetime points for all species, not just the one species that you applied for. And then 1 comment based on a recommendation that for the Jack Creek unit on sheep to go with the division's recommendation on that. That's it.
Thank you. That'll have a RAC chairs comment on their motions.
Yeah, we actually had a surprising amount of conversation on this, but ended up with a recommendation to pass as presented, and that passed unanimously.
In the southeast region, we had a couple of motions. One of them was to go with the SFW recommendation on the 9-mile Jack Creek and reduce that from 3 permits to 2 on the Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep. And that passed 6-3. And then we had a motion for the balance of the division's recommendation passed unanimously.
Thank you, Brett.
The Northeastern RAC voted unanimously to pass the recommendation as presented by the division.
Brock?
Yeah, the Central Region had a motion to accept the recommendations as presented with the exception of decreasing the 9-mile Jack Creek Bighorn sheep permit from 3 to 2 and increasing the North Slope, South Slope, Hyannis Central Archery from 1 to 2 so that there was a max point tag there. And that passed 7-3. The 3 votes against were against because they didn't want the Jack Creek Bighorn to decrease from 3 to 2. The argument was that oftentimes a statewide hunter hunts out there and they said, we don't want to take away public hunting because the statewide permit holder might be there. So those 3 voted against it for that reason.
Justin?
We had one motion and it was to accept the once in a lifetime recommendation as presented with the exception of decreasing the 9-mile Jack Creek from 3 to 2 permits as well. And that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Riley, can I ask a question? Can you speak to the mountain goat permit that the Central Region voted on with the North Slope and the Hyannis?
Yeah, I think, this is an archery permit and typically we look at the allocation and where we are putting and this one, quite honestly, we don't have much of an issue with. We try hard whenever we can to give the opportunity to have a max point permit so that somebody with those points that have been waiting a long time can draw. We're talking about one permit and biologically speaking, we're fine with that. I think this is more of a social decision and would be fine with any direction the board would like to go.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question while Riley's up? Sorry, Riley. In the past, several questions. In the past, there's been a Henry Mountains Bison Working Group. Is that group still functioning? Number 2, if it is, were they a part of the decision on these Henry permit recommendations? Because there are several, almost all of the hunts, it's recommended fewer permits. There's quite a total, there are significantly fewer permits being recommended this year. What's that population doing? Just maybe talk me through those. Those are pretty significant.
You
cuts.
bet. And we have Guy Wallace, the Southeastern Region Manager, that can correct me for anything that I say that's out of base. But yes, they are part of it. And I was part of a meeting when these recommendations were brought and they had the opportunity to have some discussion on that. These recommendations were also thought of in regard to the drought and different constraints that we have on the Henry Mountain Bison herd at the moment. The recommendation is to, after the hunt, to bring it slightly below the population objective. That was made with consideration of maybe permittees and others involved and the health of that herd with the available forage and what is available out there. The Henry Mountains, like other places in the state, have been impacted by lack of rainfall for a while. And that is trying to be proactive in our management. We have the ability to grow bison and there when conditions are great, and we plan to do so and follow the management plan when that is the case. The committee is recently wrapping up the plan. They did hear these recommendations beforehand. We did have an opportunity to comment with them, and they were made in light of current conditions down there.
Thanks.
All right, with that, we'll go to comments from the audience. We'll start with Ben Louder. He'll be followed by Troy Justison. If you haven't filled the comment card out and you'd like, please do so.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ben Lauder, representing the Utah Archery Association. We support the recommendations as presented with one exception. That exception is on the UN's Central Mountain Goat unit. You guys have discussed here a little bit already. As you guys have discussed, that has both an any weapon hunt and an archery hunt. The recommendation is to cut permits from 10 to 6 on the any weapon, which is a 40% cut, and from 4 to 1 on the archery, which is a 75% cut. We'd like to see there be 2 tags on the archery hunt to bring that in more in line with the cut on the any weapon hunt, and as well as to offer that bonus tag. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Good morning, brethren. Good to see you. My day started at 4 a.m. yesterday in Prince of Wales Island. I landed at 8:30 this morning at Salt Lake International. So you get what you get. I feel kind of like one of those old bulls that Riley's talking about, just kind of old, washed up, not real pretty, but here I am. So now, Troy Justinson with Sportsman Fish and Wildlife. I just wanted to comment on one thing. You know, we all know this world's crazy, but as I come back into civilization and I get the news that Covy made chief, the world's officially gone to hell in the handbasket. I'm telling you what. In all seriousness, now I want to say thanks to Covy. Well-deserved. Watch that young man grow up, you know, through the ranks. We're going to miss you. You've done a hell of a job, but you're well-deserving of what you got. So congratulations. And I know it takes a team around you. So it's a compliment to all the divisions. So thank you. All right, getting back to the recommendations, I have the opportunity to sit on that Bison Committee meeting. We had a meeting just before I left to go to Alaska. Next to the Sheep Committee meeting, it's one of the neatest committees I've ever sat on. And I know some of you guys are scratching your head because you know the history with the Henry Mountains bison. But let me just tell you one thing that'll tell you how it ended up. At the end of the meeting, when you have the livestock representatives and the sportsman representatives standing together on family search to see how they're related, you know it went pretty damn well. And I ain't kidding you. Even though it wasn't perfect and we didn't agree on everything, it was neat to see us come together and realize that, hey, there's got to be concessions. We got to work together. You know, it's important that we maintain that livestock heritage down there on the Henrys, but it's also important that we maintain that herd special. So that's pretty cool to sit on. Getting back to these recommendations, we support the division's recommendations with one exception, and it's Jack Creek. And let me tell you why. Very familiar with the Jack Creek unit. It's a relatively small unit and it has about 4 or 5 access points, one of which is Desolation Canyon on the river. You have to have a float permit to float that. They are limited. The others is long trails on ATVs, and it really consolidates hunters. Our reason for not supporting that is going to 3 permits. You have the potential to have the sportsman tag in there, the auction tag in there, the statewide auction tag, another auction tag, and then there's a tribal tag. So you have the potential to take 6 to 7 rams out of there. You know, I sat on the sheep committee, and one of the things we did is we gave the division some wide sideboards to where we could manage the number of permits. And most of our sheep units are managed real heavy towards the opportunity side, but we wanted the opportunity to manage a few of these for exceptional quality. That is one unit that has been that. There's probably been more big rams come out of that unit than any of the other units, and the majority be killed by people who draw the permits, not just auction tag hunters, but people who drew them. And so that's why we would recommend that we cut it down. It hasn't been surveyed since 2019. Is that right, Guy? It's kind of interesting. We've a lot of talk on data here today, and he says, hey, just so you know, I heard one of your comments that, you know, that the governor's tag and the auction tag and the sports tag, you know, kill there quite a bit. Based upon what we're hearing and the reports they tell us, they're killing in other places like Gray Canyon, whatever. The data is pretty sound that you got from all these colors. I would not trust the data from the guides, and I'm one of them. Generally, we try and tell you which the right unit it came out of, but most of the time it ain't even close to where it's normally killed. So I wouldn't put a lot of credibility into that. So our recommendation would be that, and we just cut that down until we had the chance to survey it. I hunted it 2 years ago with a friend who drew the permit. We honestly hunted over 20 days. We've seen 5 rams. 1 was a mature ram. It's not what it used to be. And so I would say, let's pump the brakes, fly it. Let's just cut that tag one back until we know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Troy. Welcome back. All right, with that, that's all our comment cards. I'll open it up for board discussion. I'll start off. I too, I was the wildlife board chairman serving on that bison committee. And we started pre-COVID on that committee, and we just had our last meeting. So it's been quite a long time coming. the first couple meetings, I can tell you that both the sportsmen and the cattlemen were wondering who was going to ask for an increase. Was the sportsman going to ask to increase the overall population? Was the cattleman going to ask to reduce the population? And about the third meeting, they had the discussion, and both groups could say, hey, we can come to the middle and stay where we are. That was huge. And like Troy said, our last meeting, there were some hard discussions throughout the 2 years. But at our last meeting, people really came together. It was a total compromise on both sides, and it was fun to be part of that committee. I don't know if Guy always thought it was fun, but it was. There was some great discussion, and I think some good things come out of that plans.
I'll start off a little bit. Riley, I think I understood you right. You said the division would support the that additional tag on the north slope, south slope, IUNA with that?
Yeah, that's correct.
With that in mind, I guess I'm falling in the camp with the central region with their motion. I can accept the reduction of Jack Creek but I would like to see the opportunity kept out there. So I would like to see that extra one go to the central UNA.
Any other discussion?
Second what Randy said, I support both of those recommendations. And for the record, Troy would better in the low roll, so for sure.
And these one tag sheep, I've always struggled with those because you're giving somebody an opportunity to kill maybe a 7 or 8, maybe a 10-inch bigger ram, but somebody doesn't get that chance. And this one is a random draw. It's from 3 to 2. So some random draw individual won't get this chance if we lower that. And so I've always struggled with them. I have voted every time to keep the number high. I'm also struggling with SFW, and specifically Troy has been a big push on more opportunity. And I trusted that organization and Troy to, when they said more, I probably should trust them when they say less. And so I'm really struggling with that Jack Creek recommendation. The one in archery out on the UNA Central just makes sense to me, and everything else seems fine.
Hey, Riley, what is your position on lowering the tags at Jack Creek?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. We try hard to really fight for not only for opportunity, for the ability to follow the plan that is presented and so many people have a chance to participate in. This one kind of fell right on the fringes of the plan. Technically, 3 fell on the bottom end of the plan unless you decided to round down, and then 2 fell right within it. And I know that Troy is operating on little sleep, but I do think that he speaks intelligently sometimes, and today might have been one of them. So honestly, we want to fight for opportunity and following the plan. And this one is, as mentioned before, kind of puts us right in the middle of where we are talking about a random draw. We are not, in our opinion, we're not violating the terms of the plan. If you round down, I think the recommendation according to that was like 2.2. So if you round it down to 2, we're still there. I mean, this one becomes a social issue, is a tough one. And so we would be fine and can live with whatever the board decides. So Gary, I hope that big nothing sandwich that I just gave you right there, it was helpful. But But ultimately, we've talked about it and we're good with that. We do understand the concerns of having the statewide permit holders use and utilize that area. That is an area that is attractive to them between Jack Creek and Gray Canyon. It seems like they get harvested there the last 5 years as we pull up the data. And so they can move and go anywhere. So I do understand that concern. I do understand the desire to make sure that there is some quality and have a quality unit. And Jack Creek seems to have operated as maybe that higher trophy or higher quality unit in the past. So the concerns that have been brought up have been well heard and understood. The recommendation for 3 was to try and follow the plan to its exactness. And so that was the reasoning behind the recommendation. And we can live with and move forward with whatever the board recommends and feel like we'd be in a good spot.
Thank you.
All right, we ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Before you make a motion, Lindy has something she wants to say.
Okay.
Is this on? I just wanted to clarify. So when it's 3 permits, 2 go to the max point holder and 1 goes to the regular draw. That switched about 5 years ago, where now if it's more than 50% goes to the max. So just so when you do 3, it'll be 2 and 1 instead of 1 and 2. That makes sense?
2.
It goes, if it's 2, it goes 1 and 1. But when you do 3, it goes 2 and 1. Thanks.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we accept the DWR recommendations as presented, with the exception of decreasing 9 Mile Jack Creek, Bighorn from 3 to 2, and to increase the North Slope, South Slope, Iona Central, Mountain Goat permit from 1 to 2 and give it to the archery group.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Got a motion by Randy, seconded by Brett. Any questions on the motion? Okay, I'll call for a vote. Let's start with Bryce.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Unanimous. Thank you.
I'd also like to make a motion. I think we need one on Riley's first
Yes,
discussion.
thank you.
So I'll make a motion that we accept the recommendation on the bison on Antelope Island for a 5-year, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, a 5-year term to allow us to address management needs on Antelope Island, I think is.
Thank you.
And will you add to the remainder of to it? Just,
Yes, yes.
I'll still second that.
okay. And who was that seconded by? Brett, or Wade, sorry. Okay, got a motion seconded by Wade. All right. Any questions on the motion? We'll call for a vote. Let's start with Bryce.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Unanimous. All right, with that, let's go to agenda item number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, on this topic throughout the state, not a ton of discussion. The one thing that I think is worth bringing up on Antlerless is that, sorry, Ashley gave me a breath mint before I came up here. My mom told me that anytime anyone gives you a breath mint, there's a reason and you should take it. But it's interfering my ability to talk. So, excuse me for just 1 second. Okay. The statewide population objective does show an increase. Modeling elk can be really difficult, and we're trying to get to the bottom of that in this plan. There are different things that we're looking at. Elk adult survival is always very consistent. The one thing that we're running into with elk is that a lot of the data that we have had in previous years on pregnancy rates has seemed fairly consistent. In recent years with drought situations, we're finding areas where pregnancy rates are highly varied. So survival constant, pregnancy rates highly varied, and then we don't have the immigration and emigration, the elk in and out of all populations completely mapped out. With collars, we're working through a lot of these issues. We'll work through pregnancy rates. We've written a script that will take collar data and predict pretty darn accurately when a cow has a calf, as long as that cow is collared, right? Based on movements. And so we're going to increase collaring efforts on elk and try to get to the bottom of some of this. My point of that whole big long story is that with elk, we've tried to fly them every 3 years and model in between. The flight is a census, and in that flight, we attempt to count all the elk on that unit as a wintering population objective. So this last year, when you see this jump, we flew some of the units in northern Utah. That's where the majority of this jump comes from. They are primarily private land units, and we're working with CWMUs to increase harvest and adjust those. And then the CWMUs are concerned too, to be fair. I think sometimes that one of the big benefits of the CWMU program is the antlerless harvest. And as we went through data with the elk committee, something really, really cool came out. Your average cow hunt, you're going to be 35% harvest success, right? But the CWMUs are far above the rest of that. They were between 65 and 72% success on average when you group all the CWMUs together. And that shows us a couple things. One, there's probably elk available on those lands, but two, that a lot of the CWMUs are working really hard to get good harvest. It's a great partnership. We'll continue to work with them to address the areas where we're above the population objective. On our southern units, where we've been more impacted by drought and have a lot of public land, we are within our population objectives there. So when you look at the permit numbers for recommended public draw permits and private land permits, they don't always make sense without taking into context where you're over objective. So we're managing those units appropriately, and adding public draw permits to the northern units that are private land will not increase harvest. So I think that's the big thing that went through with Antlerless. The other thing is that with the permits that you see on deer in southern Utah, our deer permits that are left where we're harvesting deer right now, we understand that deer are struggling across the state. The permits that are left for deer that we're recommending for Antlerless are in areas where they're either like the archery hunt that's literally uses the city limits of the town of Monticello, or some of the high depredation areas on the Pine Valley or other areas. So they're all set to address a specific conflict. And we would rather use public hunters to help us address that conflict than have to have division personnel address that conflict. It just makes more sense to give that opportunity back to the public.
Thanks, Covy. Questions from the board?
Just one, Covy, on your data sheet, you didn't have just the change from 2021. You mentioned on the elk, there's an increase, but do we have a rough idea of what the increase is from 21 to 22 for elk and what it is for 21, 22 on the deer, total statewide?
Numbers or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me bring that up really quickly. I can't set it back there, but sorry. So we went from an estimated population of 80,295 to 84,390 on elk.
Sorry, so what I was looking at was the permits issued. So this year, we're recommending 7,900 permits, antlerless permits on the elk. What was the recommendation, or what passed for 2021?
2021 antlerless permits for elk, 8,285.
So statewide, that's actually a decrease, correct?
Yeah, and that's why I bring that up, is because it doesn't make sense unless it's in the context of where you're over. For example, we're not issuing the number of permits we were on the beaver, because on the beaver now we're below the population objective and we're in a good place. And this doesn't account for the additional drought permits we issued last fall either. Those are a little different, but.
So do you also have that number, the 2021 deer, antlerless deer permit number?
Yeah. So in 2021, we issued 935 permits and recommending 635 permits.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of those, just to clarify, a lot of those are in a CWD hotspot in the Northeast region.
Questions from the RAC chairs? All right, we'll have our.
Actually, I've got one. Covy, on the North Slope Diamond Mountain, did we go back to, I think last year we had those as private lands only tags. Did we go back to vouchers there? Or are we still, I heard something last Friday night.
Yeah.
We did, okay.
Dax drove all the way out here, so we'll let him answer that.
I saw him shaking his head. I should ask him beforehand.
I had one question.
Yeah, we still have the 200 recommended private land only tags for the Diamond Mountain unit. We will probably also issue some vouchers to some private landowners.
So we'll actually have both this year.
We'll have both. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Actually, it's not really a question, it's a request. Some of the stuff we're learning in the elk committee and the data we've got is really good. And personally, I'm learning a lot of new stuff about elk and the way they behave. I was just wondering, Covy, would you go through some of that with regard to the health of elk populations and antlerless hunting and what that actually does for the herds?
Sure. I'll summarize it really quickly. So there's a couple factors here. One is what the population objective is. And for elk, a lot of these were set with a heavily weighted towards a social component, right? Elk are great. We love elk, and they can also do a lot of damage and cause frustration. And so we work with our partners in ag and others to set a population objective where we feel like we can come into a place that's reasonable for everyone. There are certain units around the state that didn't have that same kind of conflict when they set the population objective, one of them being the Book Cliffs. So it's not a biological objective in the Book Cliffs. The population objective in the Book Cliffs was set high intentionally. They didn't have the conflict. And it's the thought of where we can have more, we should have more, and more is better. The issue that we've run into is that we never harvested elk, had an aging population, and then it appears we're running into some sort of biological carrying capacity, or maybe it's a plant nutrition, plant deficiency. Looks like we have too many animals, or the food's not good enough, right? So you get skinny old elk and they don't have calves. That's what we're running into. The populations that you hunt stay younger, have the opportunity to have better reproduction. So hunting of cow elk can stimulate a population if you keep hunting it and maintain it at a level where it's always growing. It's like any wildlife management population. If you can keep them in growth mode and prevent them from stagnating, you will always have more. It's a hard concept because everybody wants more now, and you'd think, well, if I just stop harvesting animals, wouldn't I have more then? For a time, until they hit the top end of the population growth curve and reproduction stops, and then that population ages, and then you end up in a really weird situation of how do I restart it? How do I set it back? And that's what we've avoided on a lot of our populations around the state because we have harvested antlerless animals. And so we can see, we've started to take tooth data on average age of harvest in addition to our capture data, and we can see where these populations are at as far as how old the average animal harvested or captured on the landscape is. It's great data. It's a great surrogate for productivity. And it's important to not let a population stagnate. Is that kind of what you're looking for, Kent?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Good.
Great, thank you. Director?
On agenda item number 8, antlerless permit recommendations, we had 10 comments. 7 of those comments strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's proposal, and 3 strongly or somewhat disagreed. The major themes in those comments were mainly dealing with doe hunts and not supporting doe hunts with where the current population is. Focusing on growing populations, not shooting does, not support of the Pine Valley doe hunt. On antlerless elk, comment on encouraging more access to private lands, and then a comment on what Covy was just talking about with the book cliffs. One supporting cow elk hunting while one not supporting cow elk hunting. So you get that mix there. That's all.
Thank you. I'll ask our rack chairs for their motions.
Yeah, we had 2 motions on this. The first one was to accept the antlerless deer recommendations for 2022 as presented, with the exception of the public doe hunts on Pine Valley unit. And we would like to ask for no doe hunts on the Pine Valley unit. And that passed 8 in favor, 1 abstention. And then we had a second motion to accept the remaining antlerless permit recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Okay.
We had in the Southeast region 1 motion to pass the division's recommendations as presented, and that was unanimous.
In the Northeast region, we also had a recommendation to accept it as presented, passed 6-1, with the opposition being the representative from the Ute tribe, not in favor of the harvest of the cow elk on the book cliffs.
The Central Region had a motion to accept the DWR recommendations as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Northern Rack also had a motion to accept the division's proposal as presented, and it passed unanimously there as well.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to our comments from the audience. We got Kevin Norman, followed by Ben Louder.
Kevin Norman, representing SFW. We'd like to support the division's recommendations with the exception of no doe hunts on the Pine Valley. Thank you.
Ben Lauder, representing Utah Archery Association. We support the division's recommendations as presented. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. All right, with that, on our motions, I've got that four of the regions voted with the division proposal. The Southern region, they had a motion on antlerless deer recommendation for the Pine Valley unit, that there be no doe hunts on the Pine Valley unit, and that was 8 in favor, 1 abstention. With that, I'll open it up for board discussion.
You addressed the doe hunts on the Pine Valley. Can we have doe hunts on the Pine Valley?
I'll let Teresa address that.
Hi, so the 2 hunts that we have are the New Harmony and the Enterprise. It may, because of the depredation issues that we have in the fields in both of those areas, it may require division removal. We'd rather have public hunters help us solve those problems. So those are problems that we do have to address regardless. So.
And the dates, Teresa. Those, just in addition to that, those hunts are, we set them at a time where they'd be impacting the deer that are causing the problem. They start the very 1st of August and don't run into where you'd have deer coming down.
So we're hitting resident only rather than any migratory animals. The New Harmony ones is primarily private land. It may be exclusively on the New Harmony hunt. The Enterprise has some adjacent lands just because of the where the deer, they'll go right off of the agricultural lands into the hills and then come back in the evenings.
Mr. Chairman, could I jump in on this one too? I think these hunts target the problem deer. They're the deer in the valleys year round. It's not like we're diminishing populations on the mountain. And that's when deer populations get in the place where they currently are, nobody likes it. And the idea of having a doe hunt when deer populations are like this is, it's hard to swallow for any of us. And so really, to me, this is kind of a political issue more than anything, social issue, because we're talking about 2 hunts with 20 tags each. Biologically, it's not going to make a big difference. But if we do away with them, it sends the message, we care about deer and we're going to do whatever we have to do to safeguard and grow our herds back. But it also sends a message that we don't care about depredation. We don't care about agricultural lands. We don't care about those landowners that are suffering. That sends a message as well. So both of these, both these options really do send a message, and one is not more important than the other. They're both very important principles.
Thanks, Wade. One thing that I would like to bring up, I knew that I was going to drive up last night for this meeting, and so I had the opportunity to stop in and listen to the discussion at the elk committee. And Gib Yardley come up to that meeting, and he had shared with me that since he started going to the racks, that he has never missed a rack meeting. And he was under the impression that at the elk committee meeting, he was going to have an opportunity to voice. He thought it'd be more like a rack. And so he was disappointed that he didn't have more of a stage. They did give him some time, but I would just like to speak to that, because I was touched that someone would take time to drive all the way up to Springville to ask that he be heard about antlerless harvest on the Penguich Lake. And so I did hear that. I think that the division very well explained where we are with that population. I don't think that we need to do anything, but I do want to recognize that they come up, that we did hear them, that, we appreciate that input. That's what those racks are there for. And so, man, that was pretty impressive to have them come to the meeting. So.
Somebody, I can't remember how many of those Pine Valley tags there are. Can you tell me?
On the Pine Valley, we've got 20 on each hunt, 20 on the New Harmony and 20 on the Enterprise hunt.
Yes, I thought there was 2 buckets, but I was a little freaked out about it. So.
Well, if the option is to have them removed by public hunters or have them removed by the division, I don't think that's, we're going to just send the division not have to remove them if they're going to be removed anyway. I realize the public perception part of that, but where they're targeting the New Harmony and Enterprise areas. And if you've been down there and watched that, it's a problem, the resident deer. So.
Just one other question, and the CWD hotspot, I believe it's mostly private ground. How receptive are those landowners going to be?
This is the second or third year of that hunt? Third year of that hunt. Dax, do you want to come talk about how that's gone? If that's okay.
So this, if approved, this will be the third year that we will have had that doe hunt in the area. It is almost entirely private land. We have advisories when folks apply. When they apply for that hunt, a little box, that says this is private land, obtain written permission before applying. It's a mixed bag. We've had a few folks that drew the permit without securing, permission or doing much research ahead of time that had a hard time getting on private. But we also have a lot of folks that are able to get on. So it's really just a matter of maybe a little bit of due diligence and asking around a little bit. Those landowners, it's a mixed bag with the landowners as well. Some are pretty receptive and willing to let folks on and some not so much. Maybe if you're a local or they know you, they're more likely to let you on. So it works. It's a little tricky, but it requires a little bit of homework, a little bit of prep on the part of the hunters.
So is it the buck tags?
I'm talking
that we're
about,
given? Yeah, for some reason I thought this was the first year, but it's the buck tag is the first year.
this is the first year of the buck tags,
Okay.
yes. This would be the third year for the doe tags.
We ready for a motion?
I'll make the motion that we approve the antlerless permit recommendations as presented by the division.
I'll second it.
Okay. Motion to accept is presented, seconded by Randy. All in favor, we'll start with Bryce.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Unanimous. With that, we'll go to agenda item number 9.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't know if I have a ton to add. The documentation was given to you what the recommendations were. So it's 47 total private tags and 216 public tags across the 21 different CWMUs. So I guess if there's any questions, I'll field those.
Was there any theme or certain questions that come out of the rack that stood out to you?
There wasn't a lot of the central region and northern region probably had most of the question, actually probably just the central region. And a lot of it was just looking at fluctuating why sometimes we're over objective and CWMUs aren't taking more additional antlerless permits. That was probably the main theme. After the landowner permit rule is done, I'm looking at doing a CWMU committee meeting. And at that point in time, we'd tackle that issue.
You're glutton for punishment.
I just like committees, I used to think the field work was where it was at, but man, I'm finding out it's really just committee meetings, computers. It's a lovely life.
That's awesome. Good. Any questions from the board?
Just a comment, question/comment. I think Chad's exactly right. CWMUs, this has been a topic of discussion for 5 years now, that we're trying to encourage CWMUs to be more proactive, to work more and harvest more with the division. And I think a lot of them have fallen in line. I think the CWMU Association's been pretty proactive in helping to promote that concept. So I think there's a pretty cooperative spirit with regard to this issue with the vast majority of the CWMUs. I think there are a few that could still do better, but appreciate Chad's efforts in that.
I'm going to take that as a question if I can, since he said it was a question/comment, but just elaborate on that a little bit. I agree a lot. Usually when we're talking about CWMUs and issues, it's a small percentage of them. And if you look, there's 1,500 permits that are public permits on CWMUs statewide. So there is a lot of people are able to come and hunt private land that they wouldn't otherwise. You also look at success rates when it comes to CWMUs and antlerless hunts. It's double of what that is. We saw that at the elk committee last night. It's double what what we get harvested anywhere else. So it is a good partnership, and I really appreciate the CWMUs, and they are very cooperative. Anytime I come with any issue to the CWMU Association, they try to find ways to help. They try to find resolutions and what they can do to offer more. And even at times come with me with things like, hey, will this help us out if we have this new idea to implement? So yeah, I really appreciate working with the CWMU Association.
Thank you. Questions from our RAC chairs?
I might have a question slash comment. First, being on the RAC now for over 6 years, to have a representative from the CWMU Association attend our RAC meeting was nice to have it there. And in the 6 years that I've been there, I just want to give the, kudos to the CWMU Association. I feel like they are working more now than they have in the past. Northern Utah and I believe Central are two where we probably most have the majority of them in there. And I think that there has been improvements in the perception and their willingness to work with the public. I think has really gotten better. And we see it in the comments and everything that come into our Northern RAC that they're less hostile than they once were. And I think they're going in the right direction, and it's getting better.
Thank you. All right, we'll have our director summarize the comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On agenda item number 9, CWMU Antlerless permit recommendations, we only had 4 comments submitted. 3 of those strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's proposal, and 1 was neutral. And the only theme I really pulled from there was someone talking about not supporting doe hunts.
Thank you. All right, we'll have our RAC chairs report on motions. Braden?
Yeah, we had a motion to accept as presented and it passed unanimous.
The Southeast region also had a motion to pass unanimous.
The Northeast region made a motion to accept as presented, and it passed 6-1.
The Central region had a motion to accept the division's recommendations as presented, and that passed 7-3. The 3 that were opposed were primarily focused on needing more females harvested in the units that are over objective. And for example, there was one day last fall that not a single one of the colored elk in northern Utah were on public land. And we're so redistributing the elk onto public land as well.
In the Northern RAC, we had a motion to accept the division's proposal as presented, and it passed unanimous.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We don't have any comments from the public. So with that, we'll open it up for board discussion.
I'll make a comment. I think the CWMU program has been a really great thing for our state. The tolerance that our landowners have for wildlife now is wonderful. And so I can understand kind of tough to kill the ones that are making the big bulls and the big bucks and stuff that are on your land. You want to, if you like them and you tolerate them, and you might not want to take as many of them out as needed, but I think they do a great job, and I do appreciate CWMU operators. But I can accept this as presented.
Okay.
Adopt this as presented.
Okay. We have a second. Seconded by Gary. All
Mr.
right.
Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, just my standard, have a conflict of interest here as I'm a CWMU operator and landowner, and I would wish to recuse myself from the vote.
Okay.
Me as well, following Wade's lead.
Okay. Perfect. Any discussion on that? We have 2 abstaining. Okay, with that, we'll call for a vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
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 Unanimous. With 2 abstentions. All right, with that, we'll go to agenda item number 10.
Good morning, members of the Wildlife Board. I'm Justin Shannon. Ashley gave me a few minutes, but I'm going to leave him up here till the presentation's done. Some days I'm really surprised we pay Covy to make decisions for us, so this is awesome. Today I'm going to give a very brief presentation on the conservation permit program. I'm going to ask for a season date variance for bighorn sheep, and we'll go through this. So next slide, please. Or do I have it here? Never mind. Okay, perfect. So the season dates for area conservation permits are established in our conservation permit rule, which is our 657-41. And in 2021, last year, when I presented this to the Wildlife Board, the board approved 15 area bighorn conservation permits, and they approved the season dates associated with them. And what was recommended and passed was that these season dates would begin and end at the same time as the public draw units. Historically, these bighorn season dates for conservation permits have received a variance that would allow the hunts to begin at the same date as the public draw hunts, but extend through the end of December 31st. Neither the DWR wildlife chief, which was me at the time, nor the conservation organization requested a season date variance for 2021 as we were presenting these to the Wildlife Board. And our licensing section, this led to a lot of conversation because our licensing section thought that this variance was ongoing for previous years. So this variance has been granted for over 15 years in our agency, and we didn't disclose that as we presented it to the board. And so for the 2022 season, what our agency decided was that the season dates would extend to December 31st to align with the historical practices that we've had for these hunts. And we're asking the Wildlife Board, we're requesting a season date variance for these area bighorn sheep conservation permits to extend to December 31st for the 2023 and 2024 season. And then moving forward, I think the next time that we bring this conservation permit rule through, I would just like to address this in the rule so this variance doesn't have to continually be requested and just extend these through the end of the year. That's not the recommendation today for that rule change to take place, but as we bring that rule forward in the future, that'll be one of the changes we make. So, and with that, that's all I have. Thank you.
Questions from the board? Questions from the rack chairs? Okay. Any comments from the audience?
Troy Justinson, Sportsman, Fish and Wildlife. Justin brings up a very valid point. Back when this was passed years and years ago with the change of this, we thought and assumed that it was ongoing. So we would support the division's recommendations with what he outlined and then bring it back through once we discuss the conservation permits in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Troy. All right. Open it up for discussion from the board.
I'll go ahead and make a motion on that, that we approve the season dates as presented for the conservation permits for bighorn sheep for 23 and 24 years.
Okay. And seconded by Bryce. Any questions on the motion?
That's with the variance, right? That's what you're talking about?
That is the variance.
So Randy, that's for all 3 years, 22 through 24.
Yes.
Okay.
Is that clear, Stacy? Okay. All right. Call for a vote, Bryce?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Unanimous. All right, thank you. Is there any other business? I don't have any. Okay, with that, meeting adjourned.